Hey, welcome to today's session of the 2024 Mock Selection Committee. Thanks for joining us. If you joined us yesterday and missed, or didn't join us and missed a bunch, you can go and hit that link and see everything that we've got going on. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Helps us out a ton, and the like button. We're not going to do introductions. We're just doing a very short session today. Then we're going to go head across the street and go watch top 12 matchup between Creighton and Marquette. Then we'll be back about 4:30 Central Time, 5:30 Eastern, and hit up on the rest of it. We're gonna seed a couple more. We're gonna put some more teams into the seeding list today. We're gonna seed a couple lines, and then tonight we'll seed maybe two more, and then we'll pick the rest of the field. Maybe do some more seeding and maybe have a chance to look at some of the automatic qualifiers who have made their way into the tournament. We crowned a bunch last night right here on this show. Rocco crowned Quinnipiac as they've clinched. So
yeah, they did.
So
Fairfield played themselves off the line. And
yeah.
Congrats to the Bobcats.
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to grab. We're going to take 8 more off of our teams in the field board, put them into the voting ballot. And then, so guys, pick 8, rank those. I'm sorry, no, just pick 8. You don't need to rank them. I'm sorry. I'm still didn't have enough coffee. Pick 8, and then the top 4 will join BYU, Clemson, Illinois, Wisconsin for our next voting block. So go ahead.
Merrimack can clinch the NEC today with a win at Sacred Heart. It's one to follow here.
I was amazed when I looked at them this morning. There is not very many, for our purposes, not very many that are still open. But there's a few that are clusters, man. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, Cornell Princeton certainly won. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to for several reasons.
The
2 of the
USA, CUSA's too. There's a lot of
yeah,
teams,
La
right?
Tech.
A lot can happen there.
Is that La Tech Sam Houston game today? Or
No,
it's next
that's
week?
next week.
Next week, yeah. Okay. So in the Ivy League, we have a 3-way cluster between Yale, Princeton, and Cornell. Princeton and Cornell playing today to help settle some of those ties. Princeton, of course, in my opinion, very much alive in the at-large picture, but can't afford a home loss to Cornell if they want to remain in that discussion.
So we're getting to the point now that the teams that we're voting on here or selecting to be talked about and potentially moved into the, to be talked about to potentially be moved into a vote situation. You know, we're getting down towards the end of probably what the people would call as the cut line or near the end of the at-large field and some of the first out that will end up in that when we get done.
Well, but right now we're doing the seating though.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so we're voting on the.
We're voting on the
holding?
teams in the
teams
field.
in the field.
Oh, okay.
That's what we're voting
Taking
on.
8 to
Yep.
compare against BYU,
All right.
Clemson,
Yep.
Illinois, and
So
Wisconsin.
disregard what I just said.
I got
Tim,
you.
And I'll
I
send
got
it
you.
back to you.
You got ahead.
Yeah, I did. I misunderstood. So I'm sorry.
So we got some questions in the chat. First one is, what does Indiana have to do to make the field? Do they have to win the Big Ten tournament?
Yes.
100%.
Yeah, I've seen some people have them as kind of like within range as a bubble team. Like, get their metrics are okay, but there's nothing about their resume that makes me think they could get an at-large bid. So yeah, I agree. I think they need to win the Big Ten tournament.
Well, and then there's. Oh, sorry about that. Hang on one second. I was going to say just one last thought on them. They're sitting here this morning with 13 losses. Last year, only one team with 14 losses got selected. It was West Virginia. They had an abundance of great wins to counter that. Indiana, of course, if they're going to be at large, has to have another loss. That gives them 14 right there. And right now, in Quad 1A, they're 0-6. So they don't have that any kind of platinum or gold, not even all that much silver to bring to the table.
Hey,
That's something Dave and I talk about a lot. Like when you're getting down to this part of the season, I always look when I'm doing it, wait a minute, that team's got 12 losses. So that means they're going to have
you just lose
13
your
or
way out.
13, they're going to have 14. And like we talked about, there
Yep.
have been teams that get in 14, but you better have a really strong
Yeah.
resume.
Right. Yeah, and like Villanova is, close to the cut line for most of us, but I think they're a candidate to lose themselves out with just too many losses.
They've got some tough games ahead.
And they've got tough games ahead. So they're just
Yeah.
going to make it really easy by the end. If they can win these, they'll play themselves in. If they lose, they'll just have too many losses.
So, Tim, just real quick, are we voting on the holding teams?
No.
No.
Or we're talking
just
from
on
the teams in the field, we're ranking our next 8?
Not
Okay.
ranked,
We're not even ranking.
ranking.
We're just picking 8
Okay.
from the
Okay.
teams in the field.
I got you. That's what I thought, but I wanted to be sure that I didn't send the wrong thing in again.
Kind of an interesting question in the chat is, if you could only go to one conference tournament, which one would it be?
Arch Madness.
I love Arch Madness.
Arch Madness is the awesomest.
You know, I
But I also think the Big East.
I
I'd go to
posted
the
that
Big
the other
East.
day, and it was by far and away the Big East. A lot of it's because it's at Madison Square
It's an
Garden in New
institution.
York.
It's an institution. I think a lot of that's nostalgia too, though, because the Big East before with Syracuse in there. I grew up liking Syracuse when I was little, so even as a West Coast person, I would watch the Big East tournament religiously, and also I'd watch all the tournaments, like just being a lover of the whole sport. But there's just something special about the Garden, especially during that time. Now these days, with some of these decisions made early, it maybe takes some of the luck. But I know there was a period of time, maybe it doesn't exist today in this new version of the Big East, where there was coaches who would rather win the Big East tournament than the NCAA. Like, it was that cutthroat,
Yeah.
big time
Yeah,
games.
back in the day.
You could tell that six
What was that,
overtime.
6 overtime game? Yeah.
6 overtime UConn, Syracuse, those teams didn't care about March Madness. Their season was that night in their minds.
The ACC tournament was the same way.
It was great for a long time. Greensboro.
Yep.
Great tradition.
I told a funny story about, I was watching the Big East tournament. My wife comes in the room, at that point, enough basketball, right? Because I'm watching it done. She's like,
From end of the field.
oh, do we have to watch? And I'm like, okay. And I go, well, all right, this game's close, but whatever, okay, we'll watch something. I think we watched a whole movie. I came back and it was the 5th overtime. I didn't miss anything.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That game went on and on and on and on.
I know people ask me all the time, well, yeah, how's the biggest tournament? I go, I've only gone once, and I saw one half of basketball.
Oh, you were there.
Yeah,
That's right. You were
yeah.
there.
Me and
Oh, yeah.
me and about 100 media people and about
Johnny-
200 fans.
And Johnny Thunderbird
Yeah,
in the seats by himself.
it was
Uh,
crazy.
Kind of an interesting question from Tony Schneider. Since you guys are going to a game today, how hard is it for you to flip the switch from analyzing a game as a bracketologist to just enjoying it for pure entertainment?
Pretty easy for me. I I mean when I'm at home watching games, I just
I think the only issue.
And when you say
stars.
pure entertainment, a lot of times it is pure entertainment.
I think the only issue for me is if I've already been like, okay, I only have one game that I'm waiting on, so I'm going to get this bracket ready to go, and assuming that there's not an upset, I can release, and then of course you get that upset, and you're like, now I got to figure out what I'm going to do to mess with this bracket because I can't put it out looking like that.
We're just adding teams, Kerry,
I'm picking my
off the field.
working on. I'll probably still be done before Rocco, right?
Yeah.
No comment.
Well, if we wouldn't ask him for every piece of information, that might help.
Wow. Look at Tim, my new lawyer.
So Shelby, what do you think? Question from Tony in the chat, or more of a comment, but I think it's worth following up on. Is today a make it or break it game for Iowa?
Maybe not completely, but I think Iowa needs it. But I think if they lose, they're not out of the conversation. But to stay relevant, really in the conversation, they need this.
Just think there's not enough runway left to land the plane into
Right.
the field without a win out.
That's a good one.
Your analogy.
I like that one.
You know, it's kind of like flying into Tibet when you're gonna go try to climb Mount Everest. It's one of the smallest runways in the world, and that's kind of what Iowa needs in order to get there.
Anybody
And there's
ever,
not 7 years left. There's
anybody
only 2
ever
games left.
correlated climbing Mount Everest with March Madness?
It's Rocco, man. You do it.
So, good luck, Iowa. At least there's a path. That's all I gotta say. A lot of teams in your shoes don't have one at all.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't get 7 years in Tibet. You only get 1 season. So
That's right.
gotta get done.
We were just talking about Richmond as a good example, who's won 15 of their last 17. They would do anything to have Iowa's path right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But they don't. They simply don't
Exactly.
have it.
Exactly.
We got another question. When looking at a certain aspect of a team sheet, like quad 1 wins, do you hold power schools to a higher standard than mid-majors that are looking for an at-large, or do you try to keep them equal?
I'd put more weight on the power schools. I shouldn't, but I do.
Yeah,
But the committee's trained us to do that.
Yes.
right. That's always the challenge.
And it's getting worse as time goes on. I'll speak up for the mid-majors on that because you look at last year, I think it's something like 32 or 33 of the 36 at-larges went to power schools. I mean, it's getting down to bare bones.
Yeah.
We once lived through an era where 5 Valley teams were getting in. And if you count the Mountain West, that's a great year for them. They're looking at 5-6 bids this year. But yeah, I mean, personally, I would love to see more peanut butter action. Spread it around. And give us a couple teams from each league, especially these top 10, 11 leagues. And we're just not quite like A10, 15-team league, 1 team last year. I mean, that's a tragedy. Because those schools are committed to basketball. They're basketball-first schools. So to only get 1 of 15, this year 2 tops probably, it's just, I don't know. I wish there was a better way to do that.
Spread
Well,
the peanut
I
butter
think
around.
for me,
Pieces of
actually,
gold.
I tend to give a little bit more grace to some of the mid-majors with their opportunities because they just don't have as many. So, you know, I could see with Gonzaga, for example, they're a team that we voted into the field already. And I think they're a good example of a team who took 1 opportunity amongst few opportunities. And if they were a power school with that sort of a conversion rate, maybe I wouldn't be as accepting. But I think for Gonzaga, because they have less chances to really prove themselves, I could have put a little bit more weight into the efficiency metrics for mid-majors than I do for the power schools.
Yeah.
You know, I would just say with respect to Gonzaga, their success over the last couple of decades has enabled them to schedule better, but they do schedule better. In their non-conference, they go out and will almost play anybody anywhere. And so I do think you need to take that into consideration. Some years they may not win as many of them, but you give them kudos for doing it because they could also be sitting here, you know, with a ridiculous record and maybe be, you know, instead of being 22-6, they could be 26-2 if they decided, oh, we're just going to go play some more quad 4 games to start the season. So I think the committee has over the years valued the fact that not only who did you play, but who did you go try to play when you had the option.
Intent to schedule.
And intent to schedule. And if you go after that and then you have some success, I do think there is a bonus for that. And I think that's a good thing.
Another question that's interesting from the chat is we talked about some fan bases that can be difficult to deal with yesterday. Who are the best fan bases to interact with?
Oh my.
The ones who are seated number 1 overall.
Yeah, it's a moving target depending on the mood. Yeah, it always just depends because there's going to be a team or two that you might particularly be higher on than the pack of wherever anybody else gets their information from a forecasting standpoint, and then there's always going to be a team or two you're lower on. It could be the same team from year to year. Like I think with Providence, 1 year I've been their hero, another year I've been an enemy, and you know that's just part of it. There's, for me, speak up a lot more for non-Power 6 teams than most. So, yesterday, out of nowhere, I just got a bunch of James Madison people saying thanks. So that always feels nice. But I'm not doing it for that. It's just part of the process, and whatever the process tells us is what we go with.
Yeah, I don't know that there's like one I could point to. I think some, maybe, it's, to me, be realistic about where you actually are. There's nothing wrong with being a fan, but we can all put on rose-colored glasses at times and just look at data we want to look at. Well, one of the things we have to do is not just look at the data we want to look at, but look at all of it and take that scope in. And I think the vast majority of fans do that. You're always going to have some for every school that fall on one end or the other of the spectrum, right? They're either just adamant that, well, we did this, so we deserve it, or vice versa. And then you got some that, just don't believe they're good enough, and they probably are. But
yeah, I would just say in general, I think a lot of the most powerful brands in the sport, they tend to be some of the easiest fan bases to interact with because they've seen what it's like to be really good. So they know what it takes to be all the way up there. And so when they're not, they're like, okay, yeah, we didn't earn it this year. So they tend to be a little bit more realistic that way.
I was going to say probably Kansas fans are the most. Now, granted, they've been a 4 seed or better in like 30 consecutive tournaments, so it's easy to be content. But I think if there is any fan base that doesn't have a vocal minority that occasionally wants to rip your throat out on Twitter, it's probably Kansas. And you've even gotten the wrong side of Kansas this season.
We're still getting those votes tabulated?
I am. I'm going over a second time because there's some
well, let's be honest.
close voting here.
Well, there we
The
go.
bubble is a hard place. The bubble is a hard place to live,
Yeah.
right? And if you root for a school that year in and year out spends a lot of time around the bubble, it can be very frustrating all the way around because you're either kind of just in or you're kind of out, and you thought you were going to be and you don't end up being.
Yeah.
And then one year you get in, and it just gets maddening because you're a fan and you want to have that experience.
Right.
We've all been there as fans too, and when you're constantly in that. You just never. When Selection Sunday has a sweat show for you every year, that's not a fun place to be.
In the West, we have a university named Arizona State University. They just have a magnet for Dayton. I don't know. It seems like I know they only played there maybe only twice so far, but it felt like 4 out of 6 years they were in the Dayton mix.
Yeah.
And even the 2020 year when it got shut down, they were right in the Dayton mix that year too. So it is crazy. They're certainly one of them. The Bonnies a couple times.
I think that's why Providence has been so rough the last few years, because the one year that they did actually have a really good team, we were still like, you're 48th in Ken Palm, you're not that good. So it just feels like we're intentionally antagonizing them.
And it almost felt like from 2008 to 2011, no matter what, Virginia Tech was always going to be one of the very first teams out of the tournament. I don't think it may not have helped that Seth Greenberg
And
went
still
off
the
on the
ACC
committee.
Coach of the Year.
They don't hold
Seth
grudges.
Greenberg was a ACC Coach of the Year more times than Mike Krzyzewski. How's that?
Is that a true stat?
Yeah.
That is.
He won
It's a
it
weird
twice,
award.
and Krzyzewski only won it once.
Wow.
It's a weird award because you almost have to be expected to suck to win it.
Yep.
So take it with a grain of salt.
Hey, there he is.
Okay, so I've gone over this a couple times. So we do have a tie for the last spot, and that's Mississippi State and Florida. 2 SEC teams battling it out.
But they play today? No. They play Florida, South Carolina. That's right.
Gators Cox on right there. Yeah.
So if we want to have any discussion, or just go ahead and let's put the other 3 in: St. Mary's, South Carolina, and Washington State.
Mississippi State, I've found is kind of an interesting team to seed. Actually, I think both these teams, Mississippi State and Florida, are interesting teams to seed because both of them, I feel, have been fairly solid throughout the year. Mississippi State obviously had that early season loss to Southern, But otherwise, nothing stands out really as terrific, but nothing stands out as all that bad. I do think Florida is ahead of Mississippi State for me, but I could certainly see arguments to the contrary.
No doubt for me it's Florida.
Yeah, I would have Florida. Mississippi State was the 8th team I put on this ballot, and I was just like, fine, here you go.
That's exactly what happened with me.
Yeah, really distinct difference between the two is, Florida, about as clean of a resume as one could ask for. They
Yeah.
didn't have anything out of Quad 1 until Ole Miss lost a couple, and now Ole Miss is barely out of Quad 1 at 3 spots away. But, yeah, I mean, Florida's handled all the business they're supposed to, and all the losses are very reasonable. Texas A&M's not in the field anymore, but 1-point loss there on the road. Really no harm there. And Mississippi State took a loss to Southern University
And Georgia Tech.
and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech owns everybody, if you haven't been watching the show. Yeah, I think just overall, too, the overall meet, Mississippi State's done the majority of their damage at home. They have the one thing, they're a neutral court hero, 6-0 on neutral, and a true road, what's the word there?
2-6.
Just a total flopper on the true road games, because they've had, they did get the LSU one just this last week. That was their first one in the top 2 quads. But overall, the weight of that Florida win in Rupp Arena really kind of pushes Florida above, I think. And clean, really such a clean resume for Florida. The resume metrics puts them, I think they're 18th.
Yeah, it's
So-
interesting that you pointed out they're neutral court heroes, because I was about to just say that Mississippi State and Florida Atlantic have kind of similar resumes, and FAU's the exact same way, where they're just got a lot of really good Q2 neutral wins, but also a couple of really questionable losses, but they're still like 30th in all the metrics, so it's like we got to put them in somewhere.
Right. And the Bulldogs clearly visited Napa, because their neutral court wins over Northwestern and Washington State have aged like wonderful wine.
Yeah.
Does anybody have an objection to making Florida that last team?
No, I was just going to point out, there are times when the committee will reference, for example, if we can compare how they did against like opponents. Sometimes that can be a factor. So in this case, if you're going to go that route,
They played in
Florida beat Mississippi State. It was in Gainesville.
Yep.
And then Florida also split with Kentucky, each winning on home floor. Mississippi State lost both games to Kentucky, and they lost to Florida. So, I mean, these are minor nuances within the resumes, but if you're going to list those two side by side, I think that's a clear delineation that Florida would be slightly ahead.
Nice try, Gary.
I tried.
So Florida's going to move in to our voting ballot. We're going to have BYU, Clemson, Illinois, Florida, St. Mary's, South Carolina, Washington State, and Wisconsin as our 8 teams going after that 5 line.
We got a nice little family of Randy Bennett, Todd Golden, and Kyle Smith together. That's the whole tree in there together. That's beautiful.
So I think looking kind of at this voting ballot here, what stands out for me is I do see some pretty good separation over at least I think the first 3 teams for me. I believe BYU, Clemson, and Illinois, for me, are kind of a step above the rest, and I think it gets more interesting from there.
I see 2 or 3 teams that were 10 or 11s just a few weeks ago, when you start looking, or teams that could drop down right now. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Risers and fallers right now.
Agreed.
We spent a lot of time last night kind of going through BYU and Clemson already. We didn't really talk a lot, about, say, Illinois versus Wisconsin, or Illinois, South Carolina, or Illinois, Washington State. Maybe Washington State's a good team to talk about here.
Yeah, I think
them
so.
and South Carolina,
Yeah.
because those are 2, and then we can throw Illinois in the mix before we vote. And then Wisconsin, because we talked a lot about Wisconsin's resume last night, about how there's a lot of still good on it, but they've kind of hit this skid right now with some losses to non-tournament teams.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we can talk Washington State. Speaking of teams that lose to non-tournament teams, because they've got 4 in 2B and below with the home Oregon loss. That is their only home loss, so they're a great home court team outside of that one result. They're finishing with home games, so jury's still out on if they'll get to the finish line with that reputation. But the neutral court Santa Clara loss didn't age very well. They didn't show up very well in that game. I remember they got beat pretty bad. But obviously Wazoo is one of these teams that keeps getting better week after week. Of course, laid an egg at Arizona State after the huge win in Tucson, and then the loss at Cal. Starting to get a little better. Cal is another improving team for different reasons, but it's going to land in foul territory. So those are 4 losses, but you've got the sweep over Arizona, which it's hard to, that's what makes them really hard to seed, because they've got something, nobody's going to have a sweep that good out of any of the teams they're getting compared with. It's just, it is what it is. But it's, at the same time, you can use it kind of like the App State James Madison argument, where, you know, maybe they just had their number. And then they have a Boise State neutral court win to supplement it. And then I think the other pluses for Wazoo are positive records in everything. 6-3 quad 1, 9-6 top 2, 14-7 in meaningfuls, 5-4 in their 9 tough road games, and 8-6 away neutral. So it's they're checking all the boxes for me, but it's just hard to, you know, that now it's like, what do you like? Because you still have to count those 4 subpar losses, and you know, that is who they are now. It's like, do you like them better than, you know, probably not an Illinois or a Clemson? Do you like that better than a BYU or a Wisconsin? Yeah, them in Wisconsin, I think, is a pretty good comparison.
I think
Hey,
Washington State.
Matt, can you get the Warren Nolan? Thank you.
Washington State's sitting up there at 6-3 against Quad 1, and normally I don't put a ton of weight just in the win percentage by itself without delving further into the games, but 6-3 stands out just by itself. 6-3, they have the 6th most wins against Quad 1 in the country with 6, and then of those teams that have 6 wins, they have the highest win percentage, tied with Duke, sitting there at 6-3. So that's by itself is impressive. What bothers me about Washington State is we talked yesterday a lot of layup drills, dunk drills, 11 games at home against net 100 or worse. That's a lot of fluff on that schedule, you know, like not a whole lot there.
Half of that is the Pac-12's fault.
Yeah, but I mean, half of their wins are just automatic home wins. So maybe don't tell Mississippi State that. But in general, I think, you know, the Q1 record stands out. In the Arizona sweep, it certainly stands out. But with that much easy on their schedule, I tend to not think they're a 5 seed at that point. They just haven't done enough elsewhere to overcome that, in my opinion.
You know, South Carolina's been one of those teams for me that it gets hard to see how the committee's going to view, because, you know, the win at Tennessee obviously speaks for itself. The home win over Kentucky that they won in fairly dominant fashion kind of speaks for itself. They have a really good road record at 7-3. They're 10-3 away from home. All that stuff is impressive. You know, their non-conference was okay. Neutral court wins over Grand Canyon and Virginia Tech. Nobody's going to, you know, jump up and go, woohoo, look at that. But they're also solid victories. They don't really have anything bad. Yeah, the home losses to LSU and Georgia, but it's conference games. It's not. But they have such a disparity between their results end and what the models, the predictives, are saying. It's just sort of this odd dynamic, and the net is sort of caught closer to the predictives. Their results are, you know, if you look like their strength of record this morning is 12, and their POM and BPI average is like, you know, 50. So you've got an average of like 15 on one and 50 on another. That's a huge,
2 years ago.
that's a huge thing. For South Carolina, given where the program is and building, I can excuse the maybe slightly down non-conference schedule overall. I think they've done enough other good stuff. This is where that gets real interesting, how I think the committee is going to handle that overall picture with those wild metrics. So I'm curious anybody else's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump back to Washington State for 1 second. You know, sometimes when a team rises like Washington State has, you know, you tend to like really look for ways to move up. And then sometimes I take a step back and go, well, wait a minute. Is there anything on here that, like, if you were just going by the metrics, Ken Palm, they'd be a 10 seed. KPI, they'd be a 7. Net, they'd be a 10. And then I want to put them at a 5. And I'm always like, you know, and then there better be something extraordinary. Certainly those Arizona
I was
wins
gonna say,
are.
that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what makes the discussion tough, right? But
Yeah.
still, back to Graham's point, I'm a big breaking it down 50, 75, 100, and with that many wins over 100, that does, like you said, a little bit of fluff. Again, you got to drill down too, and you know, there's a couple 101 wins there, and you know.
Well, they're beating Florida right now.
Well, no, I was talking about Washington State,
Oh.
but yeah.
You know, I think Washington State could be one of those teams that could be like in a range,
Yeah.
and there's going to be some
They
other
could
teams
land a
that could
lot of
pass
different
them
places.
because they're going to have more chances for bigger wins
Yeah.
between now and another week from now. So that, you know,
But
they're
those same teams aren't going to have a better thing at the very top of
Right.
a sweep of Arizona, most likely. South Carolina, real quick, I would say a big part of their story that has really impressed me is the fact that when they went to Arkansas at that point in the year, they were kind of the first ones to ruin Arkansas.
Yeah.
Arkansas had beaten Duke in the challenge in December, and you know, even though they had their struggles, I think the national perception was you're still not going into Bud Walton and winning. And South Carolina made a statement that day, and sadly, it just some extra result right now sitting in the bottom of 2B. But that, I mean, that was huge for both them and to kind of screw up Arkansas. When they went to Georgia, Georgia was still 4-4 in the SEC, playing for a lot. I had them pretty close on the bubble. That was another knockout blow to another team. So that kind of stuff impresses me because when the game was played, we didn't know before tip-off how good either team was. And South Carolina went into 2 different buildings in conference on the road and made a statement. And I just think they've done so much road damage that it would be dangerous to get behind the wheel of a car right now and try to drive on it. There's just potholes with all this road damage. It's one of the best road resumes you'll find. And usually you see a road resume like this from a team like a Grand Canyon or somebody that dominates their league. And you know the committee loves that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a struggle to seed them. They're clearly in, but I could see them going easily up to this 5 area. Or if the committee ends up being more metric heavy, which we've seen, they could, you know, it's kind of like Missouri a couple years ago. We couldn't figure out. Oh, there you go. And they landed they landed a 9 that one.
There were 2 years. 2021,
Missouri's.
2021 Missouri had a resume metric average of 21.5. They landed a 9 seed. Missouri
Right.
in 2023 had a resume metric average of 22.5. They landed a 7 seed. And Providence, who you mentioned, Carrie, in 2022 had a resume metric average of 12.5. They got a 4 seed. So I think there's maybe a certain area where your resumes become so strong that you have to be up there. I don't think South Carolina's quite gotten there yet. I think they're more in line with that 7 seed Missouri, but I do agree with that Tennessee road win. Missouri also had a great road win that year, by the way. But with that win, I think there may be more of that 6 to me, with a chance to move up today if they beat Florida to that 5 line.
I do wonder too.
It's kind of like that splitting the difference thing. You got a 12 resume, a 50 performance. Split the difference, they're probably like a 6.
And I do wonder
the problem
though.
is we do have to fill in that last spot in that line. That's the
I'm a more
problem.
resume heavy person, so I have to check myself
Yeah, me too.
because
me too.
the recent brackets probably a little more favoritism in this part of seeding to the performance stuff.
I do wonder though,
Because
like
they're cleanly
good
in.
point,
Because
good
they're
point.
cleanly in.
some of that metric, that results-based stuff we're talking about, you have to think that the fact that they lost so big at Alabama and so big
Right.
at Auburn
Well, that screwed them
in their
up.
2 losses probably is impacting those predictive metrics
big
in
time.
a major negative way. So how much does the committee on 2 games in very difficult places to go play, do they hold that against them? Because we've all seen, I mean, if Alabama gets going,
Yeah.
you know, at home, it can just get
Same
away
with-
from you.
same with Auburn.
Same with Auburn. It can just get away
40
from you in a
points is
heartbeat.
40 points.
Yeah, but that's a big loss to lose by 40.
The nail in the coffin with that was an 11-point home loss to LSU, quad 3, double-digit home loss. That's pretty ugly. That's almost just as ugly. Probably uglier in reality, but
I want to make
for the
sure we
computer.
talk about South Carolina's inverse here, which is St. Mary's, right? They're like 15th in the net predictives, 50th in the results-based metrics. We've been talking nonstop the last 24 hours. Road record. St. Mary's 9-0 true road games.
Yeah.
Like,
I
feel
don't
like
think
that's
they-
Only team in the
I
country.
don't
that's gonna
think
bump them up the same
amongst bracketologists nationally, they get enough love, in my opinion. I've
Yeah.
had them higher than most people all year long because if that was Dayton's thing, we'd have them a 4 seed.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
think
Like,
if they
I
beat
don't know
Gonzaga today, they're
why.
a solid 4.
And I've talked to some, and I won't name names, but I've talked to some prominent national ones who just undervalue the WCC this year because of Gonzaga. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Well, it's
And
a big,
I think
it's a
that's
big apple that they're used to taking bites
Right.
out of, and when the apple shrinks to half the size,
yeah.
it's
I
not
mean, I think
juicy.
it's a little unfair
Well, I think
to St. Mary's, honestly,
Yeah.
because every time I watch them, I'm very impressed.
I
Well,
think
they've
too.
just gotten way back. They were in a huge funk in November.
Yeah, the beginning
If
of
you
the season,
watched their
right?
tournament
Right,
in Vegas,
right.
it was so
Oh
ugly.
yeah, they were bad.
They got blasted by Xavier. That game was 17-point loss, and they were lucky to lose by 17. I think
Yeah.
it was 30 for a lot of the game. So they didn't find themselves, but we all, we talked about it probably off camera yesterday, but Randy's an incredible preparation guy. And with their Thursday, Saturday format, they're so prepared. If you play them in the early part of the week, forget about it. The reason I think Gonzaga's got a chance tonight is because they had to go play Pepperdine Thursday, but I'm pretty sure they felt fine about Pepperdine. They put all their prep into this game
And
tonight.
they're kind of tough on a one-day prep
And
too,
the
to play
crowd's
for.
gonna be
You know what I mean?
in that little gym in
Yeah,
Moraga.
yeah.
I usually am at this game every year, so I've been to like the last 4 before this year.
You chose
and
us.
it's going to be insane in there. And they'll probably end up winning.
My partner I do Blue Jabana with, former J player, his girlfriend went to San Francisco, so they went to San Francisco St. Mary's game. He's just blown away. He hadn't been to Mar-a-Lago. I want to always say Mar-a-Lago.
I mean,
I think one
Yeah,
one
not
thing
quite.
for St. Mary's is to just it's almost like a step back and really look at them from a numerical standpoint in a different way. If you look at their resume metrics, they're 46th in strength of record. So I think a lot of people, they see that and they're like, oh, I can't get past that. But like
They've
they're
struggled
fifth-
to get that to move.
Yeah, they have. They've
Stuck
struggled
in
to
the
get it to
mud with
move.
that.
But they're sitting there at 15th in the net, and they've won 2/3 of their games against Quad 1 and Quad 1A.
Yeah, I think the win.
Just think about that. They've
yeah.
won 2/3 of their games against Quad 1A and Quad 1, and they're 15th in the net.
But I know, but then
You've got to
conversely,
bump them up for that.
your
You
other
have
thing
to.
about the plus 100s.
Yeah.
Well, here's another good.
There's a bunch of-
Here's a good indicator for the Gales. With San Diego State again on the bracket preview being 14th, the only 2 teams to win in the kennel this year, St. Mary's and San Diego State. I think they just look at the top of the resume. They say, "Oh my gosh, they won at 19. Oh gosh, that's the kennel." That reputation plus that number next to Gonzaga still, I think that's huge. The other thing I'll just say, basketball-wise, because that is the sport, it's not just numbers. Joshua Jefferson's out for the season.
Yeah.
And so they've been adjusting to life without him. That's somewhat recent news. Came out a week and a half ago. He was really, really key in their win over San Francisco that I covered in end of January. So Alex Dukas has a bigger role. Marshall Lonis has arguably played well enough to be WCC Player of the Year. Best defender, unbelievable ball security, distributor, does it all. And he's making shots now too. Mahaney's been streaky. Saxon's a great big. Wessels is a great backup, but again, I think they're so much better and more prepared than the rest of the league. I'm still not certain how good they're going to be in the tournament without Jefferson. I think that's a huge loss.
Because of the time, we got a little bit of a time crunch here. I'm going to open the voting so we can get
Yep.
this one and get one more in before we have to go. So we're voting on BYU, Clemson, Illinois, Florida, St. Mary's, South Carolina, Washington State, Wisconsin, who we talked about ad nauseum yesterday.
That's a good.
So we are ranking these 1 to 8 in order.
Wisconsin
That
does
is
make you
correct.
practice.
And the top 4 will advance into the 5 line seeds in order.
So rank all 8 in the voting ballot?
Yes.
Okay. Providence, Villanova, all.
While we're waiting, I just a couple shout outs. First of all, we kind of take this for granted sometimes. And no, in our prep, we did not. Warren Nolan, you're the greatest. You make our lives so much easier. Thank you for everything you do for college basketball and your site. It's awesome. Thank you very much. And then we got to give a local shout out here to Let It Fly Sports Bar in Omaha. If you're ever in Omaha, you got to come in and you remotely like sports, you have to come in this place because this is a sports haven. It is absolutely jam-packed right now. There's a waiting line to get in. Obviously, people getting here for the Creighton Marquette game, but this is a great food. We had a great meal last night. Gonna have more great food later on. So I want to thank them so much for their hospitality. The young boys here took advantage of their libations last night, which was
boy.
awesome. And a special, I don't know if we did it on air. Congratulations. Happy birthday, Rocco Miller. You made it another year.
Let's do it. Kick off another great March. Thank you.
We shut down a couple of bars last night.
On College Game Day,
Omaha,
Bill
thanks you.
Self indicated that Kevin McCullough's going to try and play today against Baylor.
Okay.
Thank you for the heads up on that, Tony Schneider.
I never like the going to try and play. That always is a big question mark.
Especially with the ones he tried to play earlier.
Yeah.
You know, we were just, while everybody's waiting to vote here, kind of a final thought on St. Mary's. You know, I agree. I think part of the challenge they have is they just had such a rough start to the year. People are trying to figure out, where do they go with what they've done recent? And then it comes down to how do you think the committee is going to value Gonzaga, Colorado State, and New Mexico? Those are their 3 best wins, right? If the committee believes that those are in some respect bubble teams, then St. Mary's 3 best wins are against bubble teams. And where does that then play into where they might fall on the seed list? I agree with everything. I think their predictives, St. Mary's safely in the field, really strong team. I think this game tonight with Gonzaga is going to be huge for them too, because you sweep it, it really kind of gives that an extra boost. Yeah, I know it's at home tonight and they're probably favored, but it's still going to be another big Q1 win for them.
Well,
And-
Gonzaga's playing really well too. So I mean, I don't know the spread or anything, but it should be a great game on paper.
If only we had
But
a device
I would
to look
prepare
that up.
for a 3rd game because it happens almost every year.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's probably a
obviously
bigger
I
game
want
for
my
Gonzaga
My
tonight.
local San Francisco and Santa Clara to pull some upsets. So hopefully, Don's Broncos, you're listening. But chances are we're getting round 3, and it's important for this process because it happens on Tuesday. So by the time they even have their first meeting, they know who the WCC champ is, and it's usually Gonzaga for reasons we discussed before. But anyway, I think we'll get around 3. I'm almost, not much of a betting guy, but if I was, I'd.
It's St.
I'd
Mary's
Yeah,
by
I
2.5,
think
by the way.
I could actually
Yeah,
see
sounds about
a
right.
pretty, not horribly lopsided, but a lopsided win for Gonzaga. I mean,
Tonight?
I have that feeling. I just have that feeling.
That'd be a big statement because going into that gym, I mean, I'll tell you, because it's an annual tradition, the WCC puts this game on the last day of the regular season every year. Today's the last day of WCC season, and I promise you, on the lawn right now in Moraga, people are already out there barbecuing. What time is it there? 8:30. I'm sure some people are already out there, and they'll be out there all day. They got music going, and the gym only seats like 4,500. So
I get it. I'm just saying.
It's gonna be rowdy. They're gonna
I'm
have
just saying.
there's gonna be blow up figures in the crowd. We'll just put it that way.
Blow up
You know,
figures.
sure people are watching,
Like
but
the inflatable flailing arm tube man.
They like to embrace the Australian culture with all the Australian lineage of the St. Mary's program. So
one of the biggest bubble games of the day going on right now too, between Villanova and Providence.
Yeah.
You know, most of us and across the board, both those teams are somewhere, most likely, around the proverbial cut line, right? And so they're playing head to head today. Both have a couple of games left, so it's not the end all be all, but it's an important game for both of them today. That's for sure.
You call them bubble out games, right? That's
yeah,
what it feels like.
it was. Yeah, we had one on Wednesday with St. John's Butler, unfortunately for your Bulldogs. But that felt like a play-out game. Because Villanova's sheer losses. I mean, they've got to win. They've got to win, and then Providence is unstoppable at home usually.
Hey, let's not dog Butler. They're up 13 on DePaul, man.
But here's the
They're getting right today, Tim.
Providence. I mean, the biggest thing that's killing me is they're 8-10 in meaningful games. If they go to 8-11, there's really no way you can put them in. I can't even put them in now. If they win this, they get back to 9-10. Then you can kind of make a case.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Balancing that.
that goes to the quad 4 issue.
Yeah.
You know, now they're a little
Playing
bit
DePaul
unfortunate
today.
because they played DePaul twice and Georgetown once, or vice versa.
You would be better off getting COVID on the day of playing DePaul and not playing the game because it's not helping you at all. Or I mean, whatever the reason is, I'm using that because that came up a lot in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you do play DePaul, you got to beat them by 50. Like that's what hurt.
Talking to you, Ed
Providence
Cooley.
was up by 21, and then let them come back and made like a 12-point game, and then that turned into a negative on their resume.
Yeah, if you beat DePaul by 10 or 12, you're going down in the net.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
I have a question. How many over/under 1.5 bid thieves in conference tournaments this season?
I think there's minimum 2 just with the A10 and AAC.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good that both will happen, and then you have all the other tournaments to get a third. So if one of them doesn't, you probably make up for it somewhere else.
I think
You know,
Pac-12.
I think the
there's a good
Pac-12.
chance.
I mean,
Pac-12's a good chance.
I mean, or let's
There's teams like Cal and stuff that are. I'm not saying Cal will do it, but UCLA when they've been on, they just had a bad week, but they had 4 great weeks. If UCLA shows up like that,
Yeah.
easily see them winning it. You know, the Utah-Colorado thing, they're talented enough to go win it.
Yep.
Oregon's got enough talent if they're healthy.
I think the biggest thing.
I would hope Washington can compete. We'll see.
We're required to mention UNLV gets that tournament at home.
Right.
They never win it, but maybe they do this year.
Oh, but first they went for a stretch. They won it as a 4 and a 5 seed back 10, 15 years. They were winning it every year almost.
I mean, in
So
the
I
last
gotta
like
fo-
5 to 10 years,
Yeah,
they don't even
yeah.
get out of the first round.
Right.
Yeah, so I looked that up. Since 2014, they haven't even made it to the semis.
And I'm old.
And they play at
I'm old.
home.
I remember the old thing, the old days.
We were joking about that because they bring in a new court for the Mountain West tournament. They don't play it on the UNLV physical court.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I'm UNLV, I would take that Mountain West tournament court and make it in my practice facility. Because that's their excuse for playing bad. They have to play on this new court.
Same with St. John's in the Big East. They could win it at home. And I guess now they are at least in the bubble, but
They'll be pretty interesting, I think, in the Big East tournament with this
Yeah.
whole Patina momentum.
Yep.
A team to watch.
Well, and they're
Tim, how
close
we doing
enough
on
if,
votes?
you know, if they play really well in their first 2 games in the Big East tournament, assuming they, you know, win their last couple here and take care of business and don't, you know, you don't want to be doing that.
Right.
You don't want to put an ugly on your resume at this point
Right.
and make somebody point it out, oh, well, now we have a reason.
that would be hilarious if St. John's loses to DePaul.
In the 6-11 game?
No, like to end the regular season.
Oh.
So they have Georgetown
Oh,
and
yeah.
DePaul left.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you know, they're just in a tough, they're not in a tough spot, but that's just like, okay, we can't help ourselves in the last week, but we could really hurt ourselves in the last one.
So I told St. John's people, like, this last week and a half, all you're doing is rooting for these other games. You really need Villanova and you really need Utah.
Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's the 2
I mean,
teams to
yeah.
focus on.
You don't think about it, but, you know, we were talking about that before we came on this morning.
Yeah.
You know, that St. John's Villanova dynamic is
It's
really
crazy.
interesting because
It's crazy. Yeah.
they're almost tied together right now
Yeah.
in some way. Like they can really help each other out, or they can hurt each other.
Exactly.
All right, I think we got our 5 seeds now, huh?
We do. I just got to calculate Rocco's. We're good. I think we're gonna. I
Florida's
don't
taking the lead here.
think it'll be pretty easy once we get these down.
The only one I'm sure of.
So while he's calculating this, one from Twitter or X this morning, a random question was, what does Cincinnati have to do to get back in the tournament conversation? Win the last 3 and at least one in the tournament?
More than that.
Reschedule its non-conference.
Well, they finished with K-State and West Virginia at home, which aren't needle movers.
Right.
And then the road Oklahoma's good, but it's not like road Baylor or road Kansas. And they don't, you know, they had their big chance at Houston.
Yeah.
If somehow they pulled a rabbit out of a hat and won there. They played competitive, lost by 8, but I think that was it.
Cincinnati could potentially
12
be
losses, too.
advantaged by the new Big 12 tournament format because they've added an extra round with the additional teams. That gives them more opportunities to win their way in the Big 12 tournament because I think it's not just those 3, as you mentioned, Rocco. I don't think that would be enough, but
Yeah, they're sitting in 12th, so they would have to play the pillow fight.
yeah, it could be a good opportunity for them to get some additional weight on the resume.
But still, a neutral court win against Oklahoma State, like, I don't know.
It would start
Basically,
to
I
get
think
that-
they need another signature win somewhere along the line, and you're not going. You're probably going to have to get to Friday of the Big 12 tournament to have a chance to get it, right?
I think
Well,
they
it
need
starts
multiple
Tuesday now,
signature
right?
wins. They're so far gone. I think they need 2 signature wins.
It starts Tuesday, so if they win, let's say they win the pillow fight, and then they go to, there's like a double bye structure, so then you would go play the, if they're the 12, they would go play the 5. And right now in 5th is like probably a BYU. And even that, I don't know if that's enough. It would be a great net win if they beat BYU.
Like, looking at the current bracket, they'd be up against TCU, and then if they win that, they'd be up against Iowa State. So, I mean, there is a chance if they were to win the 5 in a row, I think that might be able to put them in.
Can't be right, though, because they're in 12th right now.
Sorry, this is if you assume the
Oh, how it
favored
plays
sequence.
out.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, well, if that happens.
Okay, this was, I had to go through this. We had 4 teams within 1 point of each other, not tied, but so it was very close. I want to make sure we got this right. So the top 3 were pretty easy. Illinois, BYU, and Clemson were very close. And then the winner of the mosh pit between South Carolina, St. Mary's, Wisconsin, and Washington State is, you are incorrect, St. Mary's.
Nice.
And that, to me, those 4, that's what I struggle with right there. Like, on any given day, I could put one of them in that slot.
Yeah.
And I think when we scrub, we may, depending on what happens tonight, things could move around there.
I think there's something to be said for the principles and procedures that talks about trying to make sure every seed line is as even as possible. Doesn't that just look right to you, seeing St. Mary's up with that group?
Yeah,
Well, they've been
I
a 5
do.
the last 2 years in a row.
All right.
So.
Okay, now we gotta
Start
pick
getting stuck
8
with that.
more from the field.
6, though. 'Cause we're down to
Oh.
14. Or down to 16.
We are?
Yep.
Okay, cool. 6.
6 of those remaining 16.
Just pick 6
And then the top
teams in the field. Just pick them. Do not rank them. From teams in the field to go into the voting ballot with
Any
those
6?
others. Any 6 of teams in the field. Make sure you're picking only those 16 teams in the field.
I hear you. Because I have had some problems with that this weekend.
I don't think I've been scolded at all for a vote. I'm just saying that.
I have, but not out loud.
Congratulations, Kerry. You win the award.
I am a
All right.
national treasure.
So
I've
Tim,
been-
for this
I've
time
been
we
scolded for a
are.
vote either because
So this time we are for the other teams under consideration. We're picking 8.
For
No,
team,
six.
teams
6
in the
more.
field,
Only
of
6.
those.
6 teams in
Only
the field.
6.
So we're working on seating. Okay.
we're only picking 6 out of the teams in the field.
Gotcha.
To add to Florida, South Carolina, Washington State, Wisconsin.
Here's some shocking, unshocking news. Florida Atlantic trailing Tulane at home right now. Freaking Florida Atlantic, man. As we're about to pick them, possibly.
They're gonna mess around and make life way too interesting for themselves.
Yep. Six of these 16. I gotta be very careful with this one after I brag that I haven't screwed one up yet.
So looking at some early results, Florida and South Carolina are going toe-to-toe right now, 25-24, nearing the end of the first half. We see up here that could be a really big game for determining who maybe gets that bump up to the 5 line. Obviously, we haven't seeded either of those 2 teams yet, but based on where we have them, that could be a needle-moving win for both of them.
the chat?
No, just look, nothing that I see other than Tony asked about, do you think it would be good if the committee released the last 8 in and the last 8 out of the bracket plus the top 16 to give us 32 answers, or would that be too much? And I assume that question's about the bracket reveal. If that were the case, they would have to go through the entire process just to figure out who those last 8 would be. So I just don't think they don't have. I don't think they have the time to do that. Just to get those last 8, I would be
They
surprised.
do the whole thing, though, don't they?
For the bracket reveal?
I think they do the whole thing. They only
Basically,
give us the
basically,
16.
you take the NIT because there's a committee that does that, and they take a lot of the information from the
I
committee.
think he's
and-
referring to the bracket reveal so that we would get 32 teams
Oh,
in the
I'm sorry.
replacement as opposed to the 16. And I think they just stop after the top
I don't.
16.
Yeah, I don't think they'd
Don't
want to
they?
do that. That would give away
Yeah.
too much. Like then
Yeah.
you'd read into those 7, 8 seed games, and you got a lot of teams from the same conference. Oh well, they need to win this. To, you know.
The whole purpose of it from a marketing and television standpoint is they do it the weekend after the Super Bowl to get the
Yep.
common sports fans' brain shifted from all that football finally onto basketball for that final stretch leading up to March Madness. I think that's more of a purpose than probably what our bracket brains want to believe.
Oh, yeah.
With time, a little bit of a crunch, you want to start talking about some of these potential teams here?
Sure.
Yeah. Who do you want to talk about?
Nevada.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about them. Nevada's on the surge. Touched on briefly yesterday. Obviously, what pops right away is 6 wins in quad 1 now.
Yeah.
But also the sweep over Colorado State, really big. They got they're one of the handful of teams that beat San Diego State at home. Overtime win, great game. And of course, the TCU one. That's the thing I probably like the most about Nevada is they added some good variety into their Mountain West package. So now it's more than just a Mountain West resume. Of course, the loss to Drake was a bad loss. Not a bad loss. Drake's good, but you know what I mean. Like that was an opportunity missed. Going up to Seattle even and beating Washington on the road's a nice way to add to your variety pack as well. So, I think overall, I'm more solid on Nevada than I've ever been, and because they're not at a point now where they've played their way out of the bubble, in my opinion, and now it's just about a seeding conversation.
Yeah.
The wins away from home really do it for me. Just Colorado State, Utah State, UNLV, TCU, Washington. That's a lot of good teams that they've beaten away from home, especially coming out of Mountain West.
That one rogue loss at Wyoming
Yep.
happens. People lose at Wyoming, and that was just an insane game. Like, I think going into that game, Nevada had not allowed 78 points in 2 months. Wyoming had not scored 78 points in 2 months, and it was like a 98-93 game. It was just the most absurd, out of nowhere point-a-palooza you'll ever see.
So now we can compare Nevada, just for fun, to Utah State themselves. That's a game I covered in Logan. And I believe, just verifying this real quick, yes, that is Utah State's only home loss. Again, I always love to bring that up because it starts to represent how hard it is to win certain places. You go to Logan, Utah, you're at elevation. They have a nice advantage. The Spectrum's always packed, 12,000 strong. They're there an hour and a half early singing songs. It almost feels like you go to church when you go to a game there because they just won't stop singing. But in general, this has just been a miraculous job. I think Danny Sprinkle clinched Coach of the Year a month ago. All new rosters, 0% returning minutes. And, they're scheduled moderately. They're 198, kind of middle of the pack in strength of schedule non-conference. They got that tip in, which was huge to beat San Francisco. And then, they just kept building off those early wins. That game against Bradley, they end up losing in overtime early, but Bradley ends up being a quad 1 on the road. In the Mountain West, they got the Boise State sweep. Boise State's almost bubble at this point. they lost their road opportunities at San Diego State, New Mexico, Colorado State. Really nothing wrong with that. And then, of course, getting swept by Nevada. So you could easily argue now Nevada may be above Utah State, but Utah State is, I believe, still in first place.
Yeah.
So that's the dilemma, because if they win the regular season title, that gives them an extra, really important piece of their resume.
For me, I think when you look at Nevada and Utah State, to me, it's not as much about Nevada's done enough to elevate to a 6th seed. It's more about making you think Utah State maybe hasn't done enough to be up there. So I think for me, it's more about kind of dragging Utah State down with them into that 7-8 seed conversation, as opposed to Utah State really being a 6.
Yeah, I haven't seen a position yet where either one of them are serious for me on the 6th line. I've even struggled with Utah State being at the end of the 7 line, simply because this is the difference. Their results metrics look really good. Predictives, not so good. And in fact, I could make a case that could have Boise State ahead of Utah State in terms of overall resume. When you consider we just voted St. Mary's onto the 5 line, and Boise has a win over St. Mary's. Now, it was earlier in the year when St. Mary's was not playing as well. So how the committee evaluates that, beating St. Mary's in December versus beating St. Mary's now, we don't get to know what that result would be. But, Boise also has, they have the win at New Mexico, the win at Nevada, beat San Diego State and Colorado State. They kind of get conjumbled together right here, and trying to separate them becomes difficult, which makes it hard to bump somebody up because somebody doesn't just stand out and say they're far and superior above the other two.
I feel like I've spent the bulk of the season with 4 Mountain West teams. They interchange. Sometimes New Mexico's in it. For a while, San Diego State was back in it with like Colorado State and Utah State. But I always have 4 that are like, all right, these are all 7 seeds or these are all 8 seeds. Just shuffle them up and here's how you go. Like it's, those resumes are all kind of codependent.
Yes.
They all need each other to be good because even though they were like a collective like 56-5 in non-conference play, they didn't, aside from Boise State beating St. Mary's and Nevada beating TCU, like they didn't do that. I guess Colorado State beat Creighton. That's an okay win.
Well, there's I think 4 total significant wins that the conference got. It's the Nevada win over TCU, the Colorado State win over Creighton, the 2 by San Diego State against Gonzaga and St. Mary's. And I think outside of that, nobody else got any. And that's the it's almost like we need the family therapist to help with all this codependency going on.
We have 4 teams.
We have 4 teams.
Nevada,
Oh, wait, I dropped my phone. Nevada.
Dayton,
Dayton.
Guess they did a good job selling Nevada.
Utah State, and the Wildcats in Northwestern.
Ooh,
Works for me.
Big 12 got totally ignored.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's really interesting.
we got a cluster there.
Yeah, none of them got taken.
Now they're getting beat up on one another.
Well, you could say that about Mountain
And,
West.
and a former Big 12 team. So we got 5 right there. Yeah. All right.
I mean, it is one of the,
That's really interesting.
when you look at like the Big East outside of the top 3 and the Big 12 outside of the top 4 or 5.
The elite ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then
After
everybody
BYU,
else
basically.
just keeps thumping each other.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for it's very hard for some of them to make much progress because they all end up looking alike by the time that they're done.
This is interesting,
Yeah,
though, because we had this
exactly.
discussion yesterday that we wish the committee would put a bigger emphasis on non-conference scheduling. And look what we're doing with those 4 Big 12 teams. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at most of the teams up there, there's a chunk of them up there that have a bad non-conference schedule.
Well, and this is where that comes more into play. Rather than just say, hey, it's bad. What they're really doing, in addition to that, is it's missed opportunities to something else on your resume outside the conference. And when you don't do that, then the committee is left evaluating you solely on what you do within the league.
Yeah.
And when you start getting in the middle of the pack and you beat each other up, a lot of these resumes start to just look like, well, yeah, there's some good,
Yeah.
and then there's a lot of
It's like
losses.
Empty,
Yeah.
it's like empty calories.
You look, everything just looks kind of not bad, but kind of mediocre because you don't have anything to point out. Well, outside the league, you beat A, B, or C. No, you don't have any of it.
Right.
That's where it comes back to hurt them besides just the 300 number.
Well, even a team at the top like at Iowa State, who really only played in the ESPN Events Classic, and they went 1-2. They easily could have gone 0-3. They had a miracle win to beat VCU, and they lost to the Hokies, and they lost their other game. So
Texas
they,
A&M.
Texas A&M. So they played 3 non-tournament teams and lost to 2 of them. Could have lost to all 3 of them, and that's the top of your league. I mean,
Okay, so I
mean,
think
there's a
we've
story
talked.
going on there.
I think we've talked about every team. I don't know if we've talked really about Northwestern.
No, we
I
haven't.
was
Okay.
just pulling up Northwestern
Yeah.
because I think they're a team that we really should talk
Yeah, let's
about.
pull up Northwestern on the Warren Nolan too. One. I just want to point out one thing, Kerry. I think this is Wisconsin's last try here, right?
I don't even know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've been up there for a while.
They need some cheese curds.
Yeah.
So Northwestern has that terrible, excuse me, terrible 331 non-conference schedule. I should stop.
Struggling. Yeah, the terrible non-conference schedule and lost a home game to Chicago State as part of it. But aside from that, pretty good.
Yeah.
They're actually 18th in strength of record despite that, which is kind of crazy. Like that tells you they've gotten some really strong wins.
And that's
to
their
me.
only home loss, right?
Yeah. And just to go over those home wins, they beat Purdue, Illinois, Dayton, Michigan State. And then they've also done some decent road work in the conference, Maryland and Penn State, Indiana. They're actually, if you look at their record against Quad 1B and Quad 2A, on their road games, they've managed to win 2. So pretty decent.
Yeah, it started to look just a little bit prettier the other night when they went to Maryland and won. Those are like getting nice pieces of silver for your bag. It really, because a couple weeks ago I was looking at Northwestern and I was like, they could just use some road wins of any kind.
Yeah.
And Maryland's actually one of the tougher places to win in the league. They always are. It just looked overall, when you break it all down, just a lot prettier. I took them from my bubble page over to my safe page because that was enough. And now it looks, if you just take one glance at the Warren view here, if you just don't see as much red, especially on the left, you're probably in a good spot. I mean, it's really that simple.
I felt like it was about 3 weeks ago with Northwestern. It was like if they don't win at Michigan State, they're going to have to win multiple of the other games. And at this point, they have. Like they beat Maryland, they beat what was the other one? Not Rutgers. They lost to Rutgers, but
They won at Penn State,
Yeah, at
which
Penn
is,
State.
they've improved
Not
a little bit.
everybody's winning there.
No.
It's the same with Nebraska. We're just asking, like, please just win a couple of road games. And
Yeah.
Northwestern took care of it. I think they're good at this point. Obviously, if we're even considering them for a 6 seed, they're pretty solidly in.
At some point, if you're on the bubble, we're almost like doctors and we're giving them a prescription. This is what you need to do in order to be better. And Northwestern listened to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nebraska hasn't yet.
I mean, I've moved them off of my, not a lock per se, but an in for sure at this point. I mean, you start looking at where we are left in the season and what they're going to have versus some other bubble teams. 10 wins against the top 2 quadrants, 10-7.
Yeah.
And yes, it was a horrible loss to Chicago State. There's no way, there's just no getting around that.
Yeah.
But they don't have anything else that's remotely close to being a head scratcher. So it's you can't throw it out, but you can also say, yeah, it's not like they've lost to 2 other quad 3 teams that give you real pause as to what might be going on.
Power conference teams that are 7 games over 500 against quads 1 to 3 always get good seeds. Always. It's not a sometimes. I think Northwestern is going to be higher seeded than most people have been giving them credit for. Those quality wins remind me a lot of what happened back in the 2017 tournament when Northwestern made the tournament for the first time in a long time. And they got that 8 line to go up against Gonzaga in the second round, almost beat them. But I think that was, a lot of people were saying, well, they haven't won anything on the road. How can you put them that high? those are still some really good home wins.
How
I think
many-
that's where they're at right
How
now.
many of those 7 games above 500 Power 5 teams lost a home game to Chicago State, though? Like, I feel like that's an instant 1, possibly 2 seed line killer loss.
But the committee never, I mean, good wins are way more important than
I know.
bad losses. They
If
don't
you have
really,
enough
there's been a ton of teams over the years that have had some red over on that side, and they just seem to, I remember one year Syracuse had a bunch over there, and it didn't seem to affect them very
Usually they
much.
sneak in as like a double-digit seed. Right now we're talking about a possible 6 seed that took an atrocious loss, and that was very questionable on the road, and that has a very weak non-conference. Like, I just feel like there's a whole lot of things that we can just bang Northwestern for that we always penalize the bubble teams for.
Well,
Right.
I mean,
Here's the interesting. Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, they do have the bad loss, but even if you look at Quad 2B, they've been really good in Quad 2B too. So, I mean, they've taken, I think, to me, one questionable loss. I wouldn't consider losing at Minnesota or at Rutgers to be questionable losses for a team in this range. So, I think the fact that they've kept it to 1 game throughout the course of the season, it's okay. It happens.
What
You
I
know,
think-
to me, I was just going to say, like, if we're looking at these other teams, the one thing that Northwestern is missing potentially is, though, that big win away from home.
Yeah.
So it's not that they don't have we're not talking about them as a bubble team right now. That if we're separating, you know, I just moved them above the 8 line, you know, into that 7 range. Not that that's relevant, other than I think when I'm looking at where I am at this, you know, Florida's got a road win at Kentucky. South Carolina's got a road win at Tennessee. You know, Wisconsin has some road wins away from the Cold Center. Now, you know, it hasn't been recent, obviously, because they've hit a bit of a tough skid. But that's one thing that Northwestern doesn't really have is that
Yeah, it's a
tournament
bunch of
level
singles and
win,
doubles. Yeah.
a big tournament level win away from home.
Well, I think Dayton is a team that they beat at home, and normally I don't give a ton of credit to a home win over like a team like that, but I do think maybe that's enough to get Northwestern above Dayton. Dayton's one of the teams we're considering in this conversation here.
I was going to say Northwestern has an interesting game next Wednesday at Michigan State. It's a road game against a probable tournament team, but if they go win that, they might knock the Spartans out of the field. So that's fascinating. And then the other thing I was going to say is, I think some committee members, you know, especially the ones that maybe aren't watching the Big Ten as closely, right? You just look right at those top 2 results. 2 overtime games with the number 1 team. They went to overtime both times. So they were inches away from sweeping number 1. That, I think that alone is going to help their seed.
Yeah.
Just for like the casual committee member that might be from the West Coast or something.
It's one of those times where that
Yeah.
actually lost being in overtime at Purdue.
Yeah.
Obviously not the same as a win at Purdue,
But they're the closest team to.
but that's
To beat them there.
but that's a
By far the
significant
closest.
advantage, yes.
Yeah. It's one of
Okay,
the
I'm
few
gonna
times you can
open,
lose and
uh,
look good.
Just as a consideration for time, I'm going to open the voting. You can still discuss.
And for anybody,
Other than you, Rocky, you have to vote.
Yeah.
I was just going to say one sentence for anybody
go ahead, I'm kidding.
that doesn't look at team sheets and you just listen to us taking our word for it. The team sheet actually marks in gray if the game goes to overtime.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
it's-
Thank you for that.
So it's right there for everybody to see that they went to overtime twice with Purdue. And that's why I think it's important to bring up. So just vote in order.
Yep. So we got predictions for the game today. Creighton gonna win. Creighton gonna win by 20.
I'm leaning that way.
Lean the over.
The over. Yeah.
153 is pretty low for those 2 teams.
I guess Kolick being questionable is a large part of that.
Thing he's, I would say probably list him as doubtful right now.
What's that?
Probably list him as doubtful right now. Although if he runs out of warm-ups, it wouldn't shock me.
No. There's There's Joey. Wonder if he's talking about us.
Yeah.
Yeah, be on the lookout on ESPN. We may get a shout out. We don't know. We might. Never know. Thanks everybody, by the way, for watching. We've had leaps and bounds, great viewership so far on day one. So, and by the way, if you're just jumping in today, you can go back yesterday and go to a different time. You know, if you go to about the 5-hour mark, that's when, and we kept it running through our breaks, by the way, so it's not all product, but the 5-hour mark, kind of when we started the 1 seeds. If you want before that, you want to see who we talked about when we got down to the 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s to get into the field. Check that out.
So we do have a question in the chat. Is everybody required to root for Creighton at the game today?
I hope
No.
not.
Yes.
No, yes.
And another question.
We are required to not root for Marquette. We're not required to root for Creighton.
Yes.
We're required
Yeah.
to not root for
It's like I tell Nebraska fans that go to Creighton game. That's fine. Go there. Just don't wear red. Like I went to Nebraska game, didn't wear blue. Okay, you can watch the game, silently root against them, but
One question that came in is similar to what we talked about with Northwestern and Purdue. How much does it help if you're going to take a loss for it to be in overtime?
I mean, it helps net-wise, right? Because it counts as a 1-point loss even if you
It'll
lose by
factor
10.
in.
Yeah.
But I think, in general, I only called it out for Northwestern because it's the number 1 team.
Yeah.
Even if it was the number 10 team, I probably wouldn't pay attention to it. But if,
I think it's similar to injuries in that regard, where there's like 1 or 2 where you remember, like, oh, they were
Yeah.
really close. Oh, they were without this guy. But generally speaking,
well, and
a
it's
loss
also
is a loss.
Yeah, and it's also kind of back to that doctor analogy. Like Northwestern's thing they really could use is a road win against a tournament team, and that's why I think it's more relevant for them specifically, because they were inches away from the biggest road win that exists today, and that's why I think it's important to bring up. But if it was a Northwestern team that only had 2 road wins against the field, I probably wouldn't even need to bring it up.
This place is hopping.
Got some excited fans here. in
every
Omaha.
game. Mac, is the stream gonna keep on running, or are we shutting it down and rebooting?
What do you want to do?
Would probably, because it's 4 hours, we should probably shut it down so people don't go on there sitting there for 3 hours going, well, they're not talking about anything.
Okay, so just make them.
Okay, so we will close it down just to let everybody know. So we'll shut it down. So jump back on. There'll be a new one, a new session starting at 4:30. So Central Time, 5:30 Eastern.
Barring multiple overtimes.
Well, I built in a little extra time there, so I think we're good. It's senior day. We don't want extra time because they do their senior day after the game. I think it's only been messed up twice in all the years they've done it after the game where they've lost. So Stephen Ashworth said in my interview with him the other night, don't read a whole lot into that senior day thing. So kind of a tell there, right?
Reverse Caitlin Clark.
And I think this is, and maybe we've probably talked to each other about this and had conversations with people, but we're getting at the point in the seeding process, or particularly after this line, the resumes start getting much, much, much closer together. So we start that 7 line will be next, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And we've said this for years, and I'm sure people watching would agree. A lot of times there's just not a lot of difference between a 7 and a 9 or a 7 and even some of the 10s. Some years there's a bigger difference than others. And even you could have a jump where like the top of the 10 is a whole lot different than the bottom of the 10. Because there's eventually you get a cutoff where this is really good and everybody else is sort of a bubble team and we're trying to figure out what order we're going to put them in.
it ends up being a pretty interesting dynamic too when you talk to teams about it. If they know they're in that spot with a week or two to go, I've talked to a few teams in that spot, and they're like, if we don't get a 7, we just want to fall all the way to the 10. We don't. They don't want anything to do with the 8-9. And it also depends on how strong the ones are in that particular year. But this is one of those years. I don't think anybody wants the 8-9 unless it's in the West probably. But nothing against Arizona. I just think the other 3 are that much stronger
Waiting on your
and consistent.
I think I sent it to you.
So yeah,
I do not
that's
have
the
it.
funny part. Like literally nobody wants the 8-9. They're like, gee, thanks.
Here,
Like
I'll
FAU
get it.
Memphis last year was a crime,
Yeah.
and
Sorry.
those were both Final Four good teams.
Those 8-9s are tough too for the 1 seed. It's not
There
just
you go.
from the 8-9
I sent it to the
perspective.
wrong-
I mean,
Yeah.
they know they're going to get a good team in the second round.
Yeah, you
regardless
screw
of who
over the
comes
1.
out.
Yeah, not screw them over, but they're like, geez, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, the 1 seed never gets the advantage of the 10 or the 11 or the 12 advancing forward. It's always a tough game in the second round.
There's no reseeding when you got pods all over the country.
And yet,
What happens, Tim, when you
a
get a
1
text
seed
from
goes
somebody
down
else and you
almost
respond
every
to the wrong one?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're looking at it like, what?
What's this series of numbers mean?
Secret code.
See you guys in a sec.
You did vote, right?
Oh,
Should get everybody that comes back.
I'll be the first or last. I don't like to vote.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are certain points in the bracket, right, where that one line, there is a big difference between being 28 and 29 on the seed list. Final 7 seed, first 8.
Yeah.
And
Somebody's going to end up there, but it's
most years I feel like I could just wake up and flip my 8s and 9s and have no reason for doing it other than just to do it. Like that's how close they always end up being.
Oftentimes, it can be a really great advantage to be that 28th overall because you often get sent to whatever that worst pot is, which often means you're facing whoever of the 2 seeds. You often draw the worst 2 seeds, so it could be a huge difference between getting your preference of going to play the 1 seed that's often the overall 1 seed versus getting that opportunity to face your weakest 2 seed.
you know, as we get into bracketing tomorrow, we'll be discussing this, but, you know, I think a lot of people probably know, but when you go like through the 1 line, you can't put the number 1 overall and the top of the 2 line together. So in this year, regionally, it wouldn't really match. But let's say, for example, that Marquette was the 5 overall. Their preference would be the Midwest region, obviously. But if Purdue's there, you couldn't put them there because the committee will never put the top 2 seed and the top 1 seed together.
And you
Those
can't
are
put 'em-
some.
can't put them in the East because then they're with Connecticut, so they have to go south and just
Yeah, I mean, so
So much
those
of it
some
just
things
falls
kind
into
of
place.
it does fall into place, but those are, you know, just looking at it, you go like, well, why couldn't Marquette? They're not in a Big Ten school, but those things come into play. So that's where like the 2-line order can really matter,
Yeah.
even if they're similar teams, because occasionally, you know, it's going to eliminate somebody from maybe being in their favorite region.
We had that for a while with Kansas when they looked like the 5 overall. They couldn't be with Purdue, they couldn't be with Houston. So it was, would they rather go to Boston and face Connecticut or go out west and face UNC or Arizona?
Yeah, something that's really interesting this year is just kind of by happenstance, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Marquette all have their closest region being the Midwest. So whoever Purdue draws as their 2 seed is going to be pretty darn good because they're going to be getting that probably, not the 5th overall most likely, depending on whether Purdue holds that line or not, but 6th overall is going to want to go to the Midwest too.
Okay, we have our 4.
Hey, no ties.
Thought there was one, but reevaluate, and there was not.
But the chair has spoken.
Three way ahead of the last one. The 3 way ahead of the last one are Washington State, South Carolina, and Wisconsin.
In that order, Washington State.
Yes, yes. The last one, a little bit of surprise to me, Florida.
Yeah. I think no matter where Florida landed, it was going to be a surprise to someone. I could see Florida getting scrubbed up to a 5. I could see them getting scrubbed down to a 9.
All right, so that's it. There's our top 6. When we get back at 4:30 Central, 5:30 Eastern, we'll jump more into We'll probably add some teams to the field at that point because we're getting a little bit low on the teams in the field right now to pick from as far as going any further with the seeding. And then we'll seed the rest of the teams. We'll get into some AQs later on tonight. Don't miss our happy hour. It was very eventful last night at 9 o'clock. So you want to be 9 o'clock Central tonight. You got to be here for happy hour. It was a blast. And we dive into topic. If you want some little topic to discuss, we'd be glad to do that. We might start even a little earlier tonight so we get through those. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us out a ton. Make sure and tell all your friends to jump on here. If you missed yesterday, go back and watch that here in the afternoon while we're out enjoying some basketball. And we'll see you at 4:30 Central. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.